My name is Ken Sohal. I'm the SE Director for Algosec. I spend a lot of my time talking to corporates and understanding the challenges around business automation, and that's predominantly around putting changes in so that applications can securely and safely traverse the network, so you're able to take your DevOps and deliver those applications at a much faster pace, and aligning business needs to security, governance and compliance needs. And that's a maze that we deal with every day, right? As soon as there's DevOps people say, "What? I need to have connectivity, we've done the application, need to expose," and security goes, "Well, hang on a minute, it's not happening." Compliance goes, "Well, hang on a minute, did you follow the best practices?" So what we try to do is put in an automation to allow all the teams to effectively communicate and get to that information quickly. And that's the big challenge that we face. So let me just make sure. Here we go. So the agenda is really to get people to sort of think outside our status quo, what we do on a daily basis, because that becomes norm. And once something becomes normal, that innovation stagnates. So we're going to be looking at the compliance across the enterprise network. How do we mitigate the risk? How do we tie cyber risk to the process? And then how do we enhance our security operations? And more so, how do we accelerate the application deployment, whether that's going to be on-prem or in the cloud? Now, cloud is becoming a big play. So how many of you have got this first cloud strategy going on where a lot of things are moving? One there, two there. Great. How's that coming along, by the way? Is it challenging?
Yeah. It's challenging to move the applications, yeah. Putting new ones in, not so bad.
That's the thing, right? So it's all about move, adoption, and doing it securely and safely. So what we start to do is we start talking about the business-driven security management approach. And what that means, you've got to align your business needs against your security needs with the DevOps teams and ensure that everything is in harmony. And the way it works is we've got two types of environments. We've got the business-driven security requirement, and we've got the business-driven agility. Agility, get those applications exposed as ASAPs. Security, make sure that we're not exposing ourselves, that the risk has been mitigated, and we are compliant against all standard regulatory needs. Out of that, as we were talking about, you've got your infrastructure that's supporting those business needs. And that can be SDN, that can be cloud, that can be traditional environment, your data centers that you have in play. But all of them actually have a need to manage your business side. In other words, how do we actually get that application onboarded and available to our partners, internal customers, external customers? How does that happen quickly for us? And how do we make sure that the application connectivity is first of all identified right the first time? How many of you put in sort of through your change management process, changes through which you then have to back out, or it doesn't go through as expected, and then there's this what we call a war room meeting where everyone's on the call and that standard coat of arms, whose fault was it? So, right? And the idea behind that is, or the concept is that because nobody has all the information, so you can only address what you know. And what we do is we expose all that information that you need to know before you can make that change happen. So we will identify what is the actual connectivity flows for that given application for you. So that first time you get it right, you get the profile of the application fully identified. And then when you move over to the delivery side, where you start talking to network teams, the security teams, the compliance teams, they are then actively looking at the risk management of that. They're looking at the compliance, auditing, and incident response at the same time. Because now, once you've enabled an application to be delivered, you then also have to look at your SOC environment as well. Because you need to make sure if there is an incident that's relating to a particular application, which is one of your core applications, how do you triage that? So we will then help you to triage that information as well. How many of you got SOCs in here? Okay. How many of you deal with, you don't have to give them numbers, at least one serious incident a year? Yeah? Gentleman goes, it's more than that, Ken. Absolutely. Now, the challenge with managing incidents is having the information to make an informed decision and to be able to triage and validate whether it's a real incident and then what actions do we need to take. So we'll bring it all together for you. And the way we start to look at this is that if you understand what your application is doing and you understand which devices this application is traversing, what rules are associated with this application, then you can actually, one, de-risk what those rules look like. Two, you can then be able to integrate via your SOC and do incident analysis and information gathering from the platform as well. You also want to make sure that the other side of it is that the devices themselves, that their compliance posture is strong. So you need to make sure that the vulnerability assessment is done, the patches have been applied. Now, how many of you deal with databases where when somebody says, is it patched, you sort of go, yeah, and you hope, right, that there's not a serious vulnerability that gets exposed. So it's always a big challenge to maintain the integrity of the patching versus the business needs versus security and compliance, and making sure that everybody's in synergy to make sure that an informed decision gets made. So let's take an example of what does it actually mean when you're in an environment. So from our experience, when we're talking to large corporates, we go through a whole discovery exercise of explain to us what you need to do to make something happen in your business. How long does it take? What's the risk? Who's involved? What happens if that information isn't available? And we sort of worked out that, first of all, you have to discover and define what the application looks like. You have to then translate that application into the operational tuples, So the application people, they love their naming, right? This is database A talking to database B, talking to front-end server C. And you take that information to the application operations guys, security team, and they go, what's the IP address? What are the port numbers? What service are you running? And there's that disconnect. So being able to bridge that disconnect between the application and the network and security makes life a lot easier for you. You then also have to go in and look at the compliance and the risk. You then have to then figure out, if I'm now putting an automation in, and I'm going to go in and automate the change. So I'm going to have a zero-touch policy. So where people putting changes in, we've spoken to a lot of customers, and a simple change to expose an application can be 2 to 3 weeks. And that's if they have all the information. How many of you have delays because of security, risk, and compliance needs for enabling and exposing applications? Is that sort of a common theme that you work with? Yep, a few nodding heads. So we can help automate that process. So we can automate and orchestrate. And that's from an application right down to the network, and also integrate into your SOC and your vulnerability assessment to make sure that the asset information is not being ignored as part of that change. Because if there's going to be any exfiltration or toxic data leaves in the infrastructure, you've got to know who owns the risk. So in your environment, let's say your connectivity is good. So the firewall devices, the proxies, everything. If there's exfiltration of data and there was a known vulnerability, who's the owner of that risk? Is it security? Is it operations? Or was it the DevOps team? Do you have a clear sort of demarcation point as to where that risk would lie and how you would go and investigate that from a forensics perspective? So those are challenges, right? So, and then the other side of it is that once you've now got those applications in place, and like you were talking about cloud first, you need to migrate those applications across to the cloud. We can then go in through a fully automated process and provide you with a full decommissioning of that applications on your current network as well. So we do the end-to-end automation and orchestration for you. So taking applications from DevOps and providing DevSecOps, right, which is now another word in between. So if you're slightly dyslexic like Robin, he's not here, right? There he is. Can never get him to say DevSecOps. He's like, okay, DevOps will do, right? So there you go. So let's have a look at what we mean. So number of times when you're looking at applications, you're literally looking at, oh my God, it's hot in here, isn't it? I'm absolutely boiling. Whew. I like it cold. So whenever I go on holiday, my wife goes, I want to go to the beach. And I say, can I go somewhere cold? Because I really can't stand the heat. And funnily enough, I grew up in India as well. So you'd expect my DNA would allow me. No, it's the opposite. It's like, no, it's not going to happen. So first thing is my application. How does it traverse my infrastructure? What firewall devices? What's the posture of those devices? Have I got very risky rules on there? How's that going to impact my compliance, my regulatory needs? So everything needs to be identified. So we can see here we've identified certain applications go through 11 firewalls. Some are going through 5. We need to be able to identify at application level, not at a rule level. So there's a big difference in mindsets. So when you start looking at things from application down, it's easier rather than layer 3, layer 4, going all the way up to applications. It's a nightmare. So we help with that translation and automation of all that for you. So here's a good example. here's an application that we've identified, and between that, we can visually identify which firewall rules are blocking a particular traffic, and also which assets are at risk as well. Now, that gives you an end-to-end view, a single dashboard to identify, if I'm going to put that change through, what exactly am I going to be dealing with? Am I dealing with a big risk? So from a connectivity point of view, from a policy enforcement of the rules, it could look all good. But when you now correlate it to the actual risk of the assets, you may say, well, hang on a minute, this rule change shouldn't really be going through unless you understand the full end-to-end risk of that. And then that can go down to identifying, for example, here, each application that we have and the number of flows. So we've, with some of our customers, a single application can have over 100 flows. So it's not unusual where we talk to our customers and they say, well, we've got some of it in a database, Ken, some of it's in an Excel spreadsheet, some of it John knows because he's been here for 50 years. And you say, well, John looks pretty chilled out. He goes, that's why, because he knows it all. So what we can do is now bring in through our APIs a way to collect that information, whether it's file, database, XML. We can ingest that data and also discover the applications for you and identify the true nature of what those flows look like. What that does is basically starts to identify which of my assets are at risk. And then that helps you make an informed decision. So some of the information that we can look at when we start looking at the assets as part of the automation needs is that, well, which asset is showing the highest level of risk? So I've done my vulnerability scanning. We will ingest that data, and now we will contextualize per application where your risk is. We will identify all the risks. We will tell you what's most vulnerable from an application point of view, but also from a flow point of view. So that makes it very, very easy for you to go in and triage and remediate any of those risky concerns. Once you've done that, the other side of it is there's always these unscanned servers. We did not know that a new server was put in, so when we last ran the scan, the server wasn't there. Because now we're requesting information from the VA tool to say, look, for all these IP addresses, give me the information that you have. We can also identify what's left unscanned and allow you to then go in and action that and identify as part of the change, part of the application enablement, how will that affect our overall security posture? So when we talk about it, and just to re-emphasize, we talk about the business-driven agility, and it's automating the change, it's looking at the application connectivity, it's avoiding application outages, and it's securing the transformation to the cloud. So that's what the business needs. From a security side, what we then tie into is removing the cyber threat, removing the risk, ensuring continuous compliance. Now, how many of you are GDPR conversations internally? Yeah? Yeah. Remember, about 2 years ago, nobody was a GDPR expert from a vendor perspective. Now everybody is, right? That's an amazing fact. But what does GDPR really mean? From our point of view, it's best practices, right? Making sure that you can audit, you can analyze, you can remediate, and you can triage, right? If you've got all those processes in place, you can be assured that you'll be picking up something and improving the process and ensuring that any personal identifiable information or anything relating to your business is then properly managed, and that you're not standing in, well, hopefully, touch wood, it never happens to anybody. We've seen too many of those. How many of you go looking at all these tweets with, what was that credit card company that got done in the US? That was embarrassing. But you know what? Life teaches us a very good lesson. We're all at risk, right? And no one has the silver bullet, but we can put in best practices, learn to do things slightly different, and bring these two environments together, the business and the security needs for that. And it's all then supporting the application. And that's where the risk, the compliance, everything then comes together as part of the automation and the orchestration of secure policy management. And that now brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.